Governance, policies, people, economy. What's the relationship with all of these? Rising debt profile, increasing poverty figures, dwindling economy, inflation on the rise, unemployment figures on the high, and potential extremely high. How do we balance all these? Well, we have two gentlemen joining us this morning. Dr. Emmanuel Abolo is Director General, the Economic Think Tank Center Limited, as well as Dr. Fashua, who is a former presidential candidate, as well as an economist. Both join us virtually. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Let's begin with Dr. Abolo. Well, the federal government at various levels have been talking about all of the figures that we can look at. Clearly, as some journalists also said recently, the president seems to have a good handle of what is happening to us as a nation. Do you agree?
Well, I would say that to the best of their ability, to the best of their capacity and knowledge, they have done the best they can. But again, the figures are looking the other way. So if you are to assess, you have both domestic and international measures to see how you are doing as a person. You look at the mirror, and the mirror will tell you how you look like. So all of the indices that we have across the globe, suggest otherwise. It means that the government needs to take a very hard look at these indices and see what can be done to improve on those. But the indices are showing that we are not doing quite well as a nation. That's what the statistics are showing.
Okay. Let me ask Mr. Fashua the same question, only this time I would want to ask you, the figures are saying something, and the reality seems to be saying saying otherwise. For instance, the President said recently in his speech that the federal government has been able in the past 2 years to pull more than 10 million Nigerians out of poverty. First of all, how do you see it? And then how should we expedite action on that?
Thank you very much. Well, I think we had discussed that at some point. If you're taking 10.5 million people out of poverty, but 40 million people have gone into poverty, you still have a deficit of 30 million new people in poverty. The poverty index says that we have about 86 million people in poverty, ahead of India with 84 million people. Well, you should expect that politicians would want to sound good and make themselves look good. So they would want to sound good and make themselves look good, but that doesn't invariably, that doesn't mean that that's the reality on ground. Of how do we solve this problem is, of course, that no matter the rhetoric, the political rhetoric on ground, there's still a need for us for them, at least those in politics, those in office, to face the fact. Because at the end of the day, all these numbers will come out, like Dr. Abolo said, the numbers and the reality on ground is not supporting the political rhetoric. So at some point, their tenure will be over. Even if it's at that point, the world is going to see that they've been patching things through. If you hear the Senate President and in your preview before we started speaking, and his body language and what he was talking about, Nigeria is not a rich country. We don't have a choice but to continue to borrow. There seems to be a one-track mind in terms of solving our many economic problems. There seems to be a sort of mental laziness that even exudes from the body language that I saw. Like, we have no choice, the situation is so bad. However, you now compare that with the way politics is done elsewhere and how it's done here, that political office holders are very resplendent here. They are really, you seem to be, but when it comes to delivering for the people, they are unable to deliver for.
Oh, well, I'm pretty sure we'll have Mr. Fashua back in no time. But Dr. Bolo, if you were to recommend a first step that would really, really jumpstart action and create a ripple effect in various other areas of our lives, which one would it be? There is the inflation figures that's on the rise. There's the population figures also on the rise. There is the unemployment figures on the rise. There is the poverty figures on the rise. So if you were to take on one of these, which would you take on? I'll advise the government to take on that would have a ripple effect on others within the shortest possible time. Or do you think we're in too much of a hurry?
Thank you very much. That's a very beautiful question. It's a very beautiful question. You know, some times ago when I was on this program, I had said that, you know, especially in economies, there's what we call causality. It can be very, very painful when you put in effort and you don't seem to be seeing the result. So that's the state that government has found itself. They believe that they are putting up effort, but we know that we don't reward effort. We reward results. So what's the main issue here? Why is it that all of these macroeconomic indicators are looking downward? For me, the major factor is that of insecurity. If you don't solve the problem of insecurity, I have said we are wasting our time. These figures, these macroeconomic factors, variables, we continue to look southwards. I have stated many times on this program, let us deal with the issue of insecurity. Now, how do you deal with it? Is it by talking tough? No, it's not by talking tough. Come to think of it, the war that we are fighting within ourselves, we're just fighting ourselves. The war that we are fighting within ourselves, it is very expensive. It's not free. It's very expensive. That money that we are using to buy jet fighters, we're using to buy guns and so on, let's calculate the amount and compare that to buying the peace. You can buy the peace. In other countries, you buy peace. So, for instance, just as an analogy, if we calculate how much we'll be spending on fighting this endless war, let's say it's about 100 billion naira. How much will it cost you to buy the peace? Suppose it's going to cost you 40 or 30 billion naira. So rather than talking tough and making the insecurity situation to be complex, we should buy the peace. And I was very happy yesterday when the Niger Delta, Avengers said they were going to cause some trouble. What came out of the government? They said, "Please hold your peace. Please hold your peace." That is the way to go. So for me, inflation, interest rate, and all of that, they are just, if the human aspect is not right, all of these things will continue just to be grouping in the dark. So for me, it's insecurity. But how to fight the insecurity is what should be the relevant point of discussion. And for me, it has to be buying the peace. What are the causes of this insecurity? Why people cannot go to farm? Why industries are down? Why? Why are people running away from Nigeria? Because of insecurity. Why are we killing ourselves? So it's how do we solve that problem? If you don't solve that problem, let's forget all these macroeconomic factors. They keep on looking southward. So for me, let us buy the peace. The fundamental issue is that of fairness, is that of equity, and that of justice.
Well, Dr. Bolo, we're due for a break, pardon me, in about a minute, but I'd like you to just shed some more light if you can, or at least give us an opener to that buying the peace. I know you've spoken like a businessman, buying the peace, but what does that mean essentially? We'll take that for a few seconds, then go to break and come back to it.
Thank you.
You can go on for about 30 seconds, and then we'll go to break. Yes, please go on.
Yes. Like I mentioned in one of your programs, we talked about political will. Some of the decisions that you might take in buying this piece may hurt some other person's feelings, okay? And according to the Pareto optimality, which I talked about, Pareto optimality and the Kaldor-Hicks, criterion, you need to look at those variables, justice, equity, and fairness within the system. If these three variables are not correct, we are wasting our time. So to buy the peace means you come to the round table. Talking tough does not solve a problem. You come to the round table and see what are the issues, what are the concerns, why are we aggrieved? That is the way to go.
Well, Dr. Abolo, the question, it would sound like you are in the same track, on the same track with those who are calling for a restructuring when you talk about justice and fairness and all of that. But we'll explain a little more on that when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Mr. Fashua, if you were to take on one of the issues, let me throw the same question I threw to Dr. Abolo to you, where he has chosen that insecurity is the major issue that we have to deal with if we are to take on any of those other, southward-looking figures. But then, on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper, for instance, this morning, we have an information that says that there is mass recruitment of bandits. And we have had it before. Intelligence has said that these bandits, they incentivize young people in their areas, give them money to recruit them into all of the actions that they are doing. So how do we solve the problem of insecurity if we do not solve the problem of unemployment? I mean, given this report.
Absolutely, absolutely. Though I very much agree with Dr. Abolo that security is a major issue. Without security, you can't get anything else done. And of course, security rises and falls at the level of intelligence beyond packing money to go and buy guns and so on. If our intelligence services have failed, we cannot infiltrate all of these guys who say they are bandits or Boko Haram or whatever they call themselves in any part of the country. Then, of course, we have failed. So security is very important. But like you also mentioned, employment is a very major issue. Unemployment, of course, we know that the figures are rising in Nigeria, 33.3%, core unemployment, 22.8%, underemployment, youth unemployment at 42%. That should give any person in government, and in fact, all of us, sleepless nights. Now, so the point that becomes, what kind of employment can you give people who are largely, uneducated, perhaps, especially in Western education, for example? What kind of employment? It has to be really basic stuff that is labor intensive. And I've been at the forefront of saying that, look, we need to go back to public services. You need to really get people working, and there's work to be done. Even in security service, there's need for employment in the security service, as well as education. It's all well tied together. We need more people to be employed in education as teachers and what have you. We need to take a lot of the children that are out of school. We need to take them back into school by force. Because what that says is that, whereas the present is jeopardized, and all of we're now talking about issues of security in the country rather than be talking about issues of productivity, but the future is also jeopardized because we have all of those children that will give us problems in the near future. And that we're talking about millions and millions of them, which is totally unacceptable.
Let me bring you back to Dr. Abolo right now. So we're talking about buying this piece. The first question that came to my mind is, from whom? You've talked about justice, fairness, and all of that, and those are the issues that so many people have raised as far as restructuring is concerned, resource control, state police, and all those things. So, in terms of this justice and fairness and equity that you're talking about, exactly what does it mean, and how do these contribute to the disruption of the peace, so to speak?
Thank you very much. I think I'm old enough to know that in this country, we use the federal character principle to buy peace because some parts of the country appear to be completely left out of the development equation. And therefore, the federal character principle was brought in, and it worked. Now, this federal character principle, I believe, is enshrined in the Constitution, but we have suddenly thrown away that federal character principle, and to your tents, O Israel. That is what we are now saying. And I think a report also came out, was it today or yesterday, to show that in terms of appointments to positions in this country, certain sections, clearly have the upper hand, and the other parts of the country are feeling neglected. And I think we need to just look at that. It's not a difficult thing. So that is part of buying the peace. That's the issue of justice. And then one musician said, where there is no justice, there cannot be peace. There's no justice, there cannot be peace. So there's a very, very simple solution to the problem we have. Very, very simple. And let me take your mind back to South Africa, for instance. After the apartheid era, what did Nelson Mandela do? Ordinarily, for those who talk tough, they would have said, we are going to deal with the whites. They would have thrown the whites out of that country. What did he do? He set up a reconciliation commission. And the whole place was at peace. I think we should value peace rather than war, rather than killing ourselves. Because killing ourselves, you are killing your human capital. And the money you are using to buy those guns don't remain in your country. Those monies go back to developed countries. So it does, in both ways, it's a loss. It's a loss. I think it's a lot cheaper to sit on a round table so that we can stop killing ourselves. Once we're able to reach out to peace, I can tell you, within 2 months, I promise you, this country will surpass even developed countries in terms of development. So let's go back to fairness, justice, and equity. Of course, once you do that, then many Nigerians will believe in the Nigerian project. As it is, many people don't believe in the Nigerian project. Our children are running away from this country. That is not a good thing. Your human capital, your knowledge, everything is running away from this country. You see, your value is just disappearing. So let us sit down in a round table and discuss this peace. And I told you I'm so happy when the government said, Niger Delta Avengers, please hold your peace. That alone, it doesn't cost you 1 naira. You will see the effect. So that is the point I'm making. Let us buy peace.
Well, I'm not sure if you said in 2 months, Nigeria will be even better than developed countries.
Yes. Once you buy this peace, in 2 months, we will surpass UK. Quote me.
Okay, well, I mean, no need to quote you. Nigerians can hear you. But let's go back to Mr. Fasua on this one. I mean, if we're talking about buying peace, clearly you need money, revenue to buy anything or to engage in any venture, as it were. There's been a lot of conversation around this. I know you've written about this. You've spoken about, the talk around Nigeria getting loans. Are you one of those right now asking IMF, World Bank, EU not to give Nigeria loans?
Well, I wouldn't say they shouldn't give us loans. Especially we're getting quite a bit of money from the Chinese these days. Of course, it's important to continue to leverage. You continue to get loans and do more into the future. But in terms of internal capacity for productivity and for generating internal revenue, I can see that the Vice President this morning has spoken about the need for digital taxation for some of these big international organizations that do business in Nigeria. We're not the only ones. Europe is thinking about that. They call it Facebook tax and so on. The rhetoric on security is that we seem to be focused on the negatives. We're not focused on in terms of productivity, okay, in our country. We should be focused on productivity. When Dr. Abolo says in 2 months' time we can surpass developed countries, of course, that's, I would probably say I don't think that's possible because we have not actually shown the vision that is required for that kind of leap. The Chinese economy grew at 10% year on year for more than 15 years. They slowed down to 6% pre-COVID, and it was like all hell was let loose. The Chinese economy was said to be in recession, even at 6% or 6.5%. And here we are. In fact, okay, right now as we stand, we are predicted to grow by the IMF World Bank at 1.8% in 2021, when even developed countries, the OECD region, is expected to grow at 5.5%. And you ask yourself, what's going on? So beyond, you see, you know, they said, our people say when you have a big problem, other small ones will come and pile on it. We had a big problem before this security problem came. We had this big problem of lack of visioning. We had this big problem of lack of productivity. All right, we had this big problem that we hadn't actually revved ourselves up to be able to take on our manifest destiny. And then, of course, security came. Of course, security came because we neglected education. Our intelligence services had gone to sleep. And so all of these things pile up. Then we were focused more on things like religion, and we use all our factories to build churches and to of course, all sorts of things. You know, so that's why all of this thing came. So look, yes, we can buy the peace. But mind you, in buying the peace also, there are two things. Number one is that many people face trouble in this country in order to get political advantage and, of course, economic advantage. We've heard one cleric talk about that we should compensate these guys who are killing people randomly. They go into Sokoto, they go into Katsina, they kill 100 villagers. We say we should give them money. So look, we're not going to fall into that, all right? So if in buying the peace, it's not just about giving money to those guys. And of course, when you give money to those guys, and by the time they're broke, they come back even bigger because you've armed them. So we have to be careful. But I know that that's not what is meant by buying the peace. But of course, whatever it is we must do, we need to do. Rejig our security sector, our intelligence sector, and, you know, ensure we dialogue with people, you know, reduces political tensions, people feeling left behind, people feeling like, you know, their regions have been ignored. Of all of that, political solutions must be found. But more importantly is we should remember, see, this, if you check my Facebook page, you'll see I posted something. Chinese people came to Nigeria. They got this cassava, and they built a cassava gari processing. They call it gari. They didn't call it their own name. They said gari processing company, a machine. It's a 6-component machine. They put the cassava there, it peels it very perfectly, and it, you know, then it shreds it into pieces. Then it takes out the liquid, then it ferments it, then it fries the gari. Our gari is big now. So you then ask yourself, we've had University of Ibadan since 72 years or 73 years now. Why can we not process our own gari in that, you know, mechanized fashion that is perfect, that reduces the losses into almost nothing? Of course, fine. We have, of course, the issue would then be, what would our women do in the villages that are frying the gari now? But that's how countries think. When you think about that, you say, okay, how do we get our women to continue to be engaged? But you cannot say, look, you want to stay at the level of manual processing of gari when foreigners are coming here to take that processing of gari from us. All right? The same thing, our pounded yam pounder. Somebody abroad, Japan, had to be producing that thing to sell it back to Nigeria. So we have a fundamental problem. Not only Nigeria, you probably will say Sub-Saharan Africa, Black Africa has a problem in terms of this productivity that we're talking about, in terms of innovation, innovative thinking. That's what we need to be. We need to address that as much as we're addressing the security issue. That also needs to be seriously addressed. We should be also visioning at the political level to say, this country, we need to be running at double-digit growth. And we need that, of course, because our population growth is 2.6%, which is pretty much very healthy, if you like, you know, call it that, you know. That's that. Inflation is doing 17.93%, meaning that if you're growing at 2%, you are dying. The economy is dying. We need to vision the economy and say, listen, we can run at 15%. And what that means, for example, is that myself and yourself can be 15% more productive this year. In fact, we can be 15% more productive every day. And therefore, we can earn 15% more. That is how GDP is calculated. I know that I can earn 15%, I should be able to earn 15% more than I earned last year, this year. That's 15% growth in my personal GDP, which adds up to the economy. All right, so that's where we should. We haven't even started this economy at all. We have not started. 15 million children out of school, you have not started. I see it as a major risk, but it's also a major opportunity. If you want to put 15 million children in school, you need, for 1,000 persons per school, you need 15,000 schools that need to be built. All right, and you're building 15 schools, that's the 150,000. Of this idea, you see that the entrepreneurship approach that we have adopted has not quite delivered because, of course, unemployment keeps on increasing. The youth entrepreneurship approach probably has not delivered as much as we want. So there's a need for rethink. There's a need to think about public service, security, education, social services, environmental sector, health sector. We need to go back to the basic and lay the foundation for the economy. That foundation has not been laid. So you're basically just throwing the blocks in the air and hoping that it hangs there. It's not going to hang when you don't have a foundation. You need to have a proper foundation that Nigerians are proper human beings. They deserve the good life, and therefore the government must provide the good life. The worst thing that may happen to a country is to have security challenges, because if you go back to Hobbesian theory of society, what they call the social contract, that people came together to say that, look, they're vesting their right to defend themselves, their own personal security, vesting it in the government to protect them. So when the government cannot protect them, that means society is gone. And that's what we're toying with here. Basically, that society is gone. Everybody carries their own daggers and their own guns as well. So that's what we must go back to. That basic provision of social services, of social infrastructure, of physical infrastructure. And lastly, so that I can allow Dr. Abolo to speak, that many of the problems we have, one of the big issues we have on ground is that we're not involving our own labor, okay? We're not involving our own labor in our own development. So the Chinese came here, they're giving us a good rail track, fantastic, but how many Nigerians were employed in that process? How much of technology transfer did we get? Can we replicate that today in a small scale? No, we can't, okay? So they bring their coaches, they bring their sleepers, they bring everything from there, and then they bring the labor as well.
Well, clearly, Mr. Fashua, I recall that part of the conversation, yes. My apologies, I recall that part of the conversation for engaging the Chinese and any other multinational into the country for any project, technology transfer was always inherent. But how well, again, perhaps some of the people would agree with you, how well that has been done, that's another conversation altogether. But my colleague in Abuja, Malkwe, has a question for both of you gentlemen. Malkwe.
Indeed, let me quickly take this to Dr. Abolo. I'm sure he'd like a quick response as to whether or not settling bandits was one of the things he meant by buying the peace.
Yes, I think I need to be very clear. The literature is very clear on what is meant by buying the peace. It's an emotional issue. It's not using money to buy peace. For instance, like I said, the government just issued a statement that, Niger Delta Avengers, hold your peace. It would have been different if the government had said, we are going to kill you, we are going to deal with you the way you understand. That would have exacerbated the situation. So coming to the round table, like I mentioned, the South African, case, it's a matter of emotional issue, a matter of dialogue, reaching understanding. What are the issues and so on. Sometimes it's not expensive. Maybe the cost of organizing those dialogues where everyone will speak and we will all understand ourselves. So I am not following the Gumi model of using money to pay ransom and all of that. That's not the direction in which I'm going. But I want this discourse also, if you give me the permission, to look at this borrowing issue, the borrowing issue. The Senate President has said that we're a poor country, we don't have revenue and all of that. I think a budget has two sides. You have the revenue side and then you have the expenditure side. We keep on looking only at the revenue side, and that's because maybe we do not have the political will to look at the expenditure side. What stops us from cutting down on the cost of governance? It's a very difficult subject, but that's the way to go in the circumstance. Most of the debts that we have borrowed, it will also be interesting to look at to have the breakdown of how this money is deployed. I think maybe the National Bureau of Statistics should give us the breakdown. This billions, 30-something trillion, can we have the breakdown of how this money has been deployed? Because there's nothing pejorative, there's nothing wrong in borrowing, that's my argument. But how do you deploy this money? So if the money is not deployed on productive sectors, and what are these productive sectors? It's very clear. You have the real sectors, services sector, the tertiary and extraction primary, sector. Then of course you have the quaternary the quaternary sector, which has to do with intellectual activities. So first of all, if we want to interrogate this discussion of debt, and sustainability, let us have the breakdown. If this, because people don't seem to see the results, the outcome is not impacting on the living standards of people. That's why people are getting worried. So the fact that you have not reached the sustainability index, position of 30% or 70% for ECOWAS, that is beyond the point. That's not the point. It is to say, how do you deploy these debts, both domestic and external? That's a major issue. My real point is that for as long as we allow this war to linger, this war within us, the worst it will be for this country. We shouldn't allow it to linger. We shouldn't. That's why I said this model of buying the peace. Come up with a commission or whatever, and let's sort out ourselves and solve this problem. The final point is to tell you about this insecurity. It can be very painful for government. For instance, you have spent so much money on railway, connecting Abuja, connecting Lagos, very beautiful. But we just saw people cutting the rail lines. You just see people cutting the rail lines. So at the end of the day, that kind of investment may just go down the drain because of insecurity. That is why I'm saying, let us buy the peace. That's the way to go. Otherwise, you'll be spending your time and money and resources, and you do not seem to see the results. So buying the peace does not mean spending money to buy peace. It doesn't cost money. It is cheap.
Just to raise in that matter that you have talked about, gentlemen, I was hoping that we'll be able to raise the issues around the employers of labor, the private sector. In 30 seconds, Mr. Fashua, how do you think we can engage the private sector, who you all say are the primary employers of labor, and that government is just supposed to provide the enabling environment for that to happen?
Okay, so very quickly, I'd like to quickly conclude on my point that, we need to involve our own resources more, our own labor more, our own university graduates and university, even the students. A power plant was built in OAU Ife and launched, and now I hear that OAU Ife, Obafemi Awolowo University, is going to be distributing electricity to the environment. But none of the students, none of the faculty was involved in the building of that power plant. Now, nobody is going to give you a technology transfer on a platter. It's not going to happen. You have to get it. You have to force them. And you have to also ensure that you have hands-on approach towards using whatever you learn to create your own stuff and work them and make your mistakes as well. Now, again, I would also say that whereas the private sector provides employment, but where we are at our stage, we have not set the background for the thriving of the private sector. And that's what I mean that, listen, your insecurity, lack of education system, no social service. In the United States, 680,000 people are employed in social services. They give them 7-8 children to take care of. They go around the houses of those children, make sure they go to school, they get fed and all of that. That is how to take care of the future of the country. With 15 million children on the street, you probably need 1 million people employed into a brand new social services sector. Now, without all of these things, we're in jeopardy. And so you see that we're not leveraging our resources. We're not leveraging what we have. We are not putting money in the pockets of people, and there's work to be done before we now talk about the private sector. The private sector, mind you, will always use the best of technology. They are not there to give you employment. The private sector is there to make profit. It is the role of the government to ensure minimum unemployment level in anywhere in the world. Right? So now the private sector will thrive when people have money to spend to buy
Absolutely.
the things that they produce.
Well, there are so many issues to raise, as you gentlemen have talked about. The dwindling economic situation is definitely staggering, and the concerns are there. Hopefully, we'll be able to handle these problems in good enough time. Dr. Emmanuel Abolo, Director General, the Economic Think Tank Center Limited, as well as Dr. Fashua, former presidential candidate and an economist. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of our program this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you.